Elite teacher forces a simple elderly woman to solve a math problem, unaware she's a mathematical. Margaret Walsh shuffled along Fifth Avenue, her weathered hands clutching a simple leather purse that had seen better days. At 73, she still insisted on taking the subway from her modest apartment in Queens to Manhattan twice a month. Today's mission, finding a birthday gift for her grandson. How to run for the desert. The autumn air carried a crisp chill as Margaret paused before the gleaming facade of Lumiere, the newest luxury boutique that everyone was talking about. Through the spotless windows, she could see elegant displays of scarves and accessories that reminded her of the silk tie her grandson had admired in a magazine. Just a quick look, she murmured to herself, straightening her plain beige coat before pushing open the heavy glass door. The boutique's interior was a symphony of marble, glass, and soft lighting. Two impeccably dressed saleswomen conversed quietly near the register, while a security guard stood discreetly by the entrance. Margaret nodded politely at him before making her way to a display of men's accessories. "May I help you?" The voice was cool, professional, with an undercurrent of assessment. The saleswoman, her name tag read Alexis, wore an expression that had already determined Margaret didn't belong. "I'm looking for a tie for my grandson." Margaret smiled warmly. "Something special for his birthday." Alexis's eyes swept over Margaret's sensible shoes, her off-the-rack coat, the unfashionable purse. "Our ties begin at $350. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at Macy's?" Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Price isn't an issue." "May I see that blue one?" A second saleswoman approached, exchanging a meaningful glance with Alexis. "Is everything all right over here?" "This lady is interested in our ties," Alexis said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe Margaret could afford anything in the store. "I see." The second woman, whose tag identified her as Victoria, manager, turned to Margaret with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ooh, we're actually preparing for a private event this afternoon. I'm afraid we're not accepting regular customers at the moment." Margaret blinked in confusion. "But those people just walked in," she said, nodding toward a couple being warmly greeted by another staff member. Victoria's smile thinned. "As I said, we're preparing for a private event for our preferred clients." The message was unmistakable. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks, but years of dignity kept her spine straight. "I understand," she said quietly, though they both knew she'd been judged solely on her appearance. "Thank you for your time." As she turned to leave, Victoria murmured something to Alexis that made both women laugh softly. The security guard stepped forward, unnecessarily escorting Margaret to the door as if worried she might pocket something on her way out. Standing once again on the sidewalk, Margaret clutched her purse a little tighter as a wave of humiliation washed over her. She'd never been one to care about status or appearances, but being dismissed so blatantly stung more than she wanted to admit. With a deep breath, she pulled out her phone, a new model her son had insisted she take, and pressed a single button. "James, it's Mom. Are you busy?" James Walsh ended the call with his mother and set his phone down on the polished mahogany desk. The Manhattan skyline stretched before him through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, but his mind was elsewhere. Something in his mother's voice had sounded off, a slight tremor she'd tried to hide. "Everything okay, boss?" Diane, his chief of staff, looked up from her tablet. "Just my mom," James said, his brow furrowed. "See, she's downtown shopping. Sounded upset about something, but you know how she is. Wouldn't say what." Diane nodded knowingly. Margaret Walsh's stubborn independence was legendary among James's inner circle. Despite her son's net worth crossing $11 billion last quarter, she still lived in the same Queens apartment, still clipped coupons, still took the subway. The woman who had raised James alone after his father died had refused every luxury he'd tried to provide since Axiom Technologies went public 6 years ago. "I'm going to meet her for lunch," James decided, rising from his desk. At 43, he moved with the energy of someone who didn't believe in wasting a single minute. "Reschedule the investors, would you? They flew in from Singapore specifically to—" "They can wait." His tone was pleasant but firm. "See, family first." 30 minutes later, James's custom Escalade pulled up to the small Italian restaurant where he'd arranged to meet his mother. He spotted her immediately at a corner table, her silver hair neatly pinned back, those same sensible clothes she always wore. The sight of her, so small, yet so formidable, made something in his chest tighten as it always did. "Hey, Mom," he said, bending to kiss her cheek before sitting opposite her. Margaret's face brightened. "James, you didn't need to come all the way down here. I know how busy you are." "Never too busy for you." He studied her face. The slight redness around her eyes confirmed his suspicion. "What happened?" "Nothing important," she deflected, opening her menu. "How's that new project going? The one with the hospitals?" James gently laid his hand over hers. "Mom, talk to me," Margaret sighed, setting the menu down. "It's silly, really. I went to look for a gift for Ethan, and, well, I wasn't welcomed at one of the stores." With patient questions, James extracted the full story, each detail making his jaw tighten further. By the time Margaret described being escorted out by security, his eyes had taken on the steely look his business competitors had learned to fear. "Lumiere," he repeated, making a note in his phone. "On 5th. It's not important, James. I should have gone somewhere else anyway. It's important to me." His voice was quiet but resolute. "No one treats my mother that way." "Don't make a fuss," Margaret insisted. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting." James softened. "I know you're not. You're the strongest person I've ever known." He reached for her hand again. "But sometimes, even the strong deserve someone to stand up for them." Margaret changed the subject, asking about James's son Ethan, his ex-wife Natalie, the foundation work that occupied much of James's philanthropy efforts. He allowed it, making a mental note of the time. As they finished their meal, James made a call. His voice was pleasant when he spoke, but Margaret recognized the tone he used when decisions had already been made. "Ryan, I need the car in 20. And call legal. Tell Marissa to pull up everything we have on a boutique called Lumiere. Owner, parent company, everything." His mother's expression was a mixture of exasperation and resignation. "James, just a bit of due diligence, Mom." He smiled, but there was steel behind it. Nothing to worry about. Victoria Peterson had been managing high-end retail for 15 years. She prided herself on her ability to spot real customers from browsers, time wasters, and the occasional shoplifter. Lumiere had been open just 6 months, but under her management, it had already become one of the most exclusive shopping destinations in Manhattan. "Reservation for Hawthorne at 4 she reminded Alexis, checking her perfectly manicured nails. "And the Miyazaki account at 5:30. Mr. Miyazaki specifically requested you for his wife's shopping appointment." Alexis nodded, adjusting a display of handcrafted Italian scarves. "That old woman earlier, can you believe she thought she could afford anything here?" Victoria smirked, probably saving her pension for months to buy something for her grandson. "We get one like that every week." The sleek glass door swung open, bringing with it a burst of autumn air and a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Victoria immediately straightened, customer service smile in place as she assessed: Tom Ford suit, Patek Philippe watch, haircut that cost more than most people's rent. This was exactly the type of client Lumiere catered to. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Lumiere. How may we assist you today? The man surveyed the boutique unhurriedly. Are you Victoria? His voice was pleasant, but something in his direct gaze made Victoria's smile falter slightly. Yes, I'm the manager, and you are? James Walsh. He extended a business card between two fingers. Victoria's eyes widened slightly as she read the card. Axiom Technologies. Everyone in New York knew the company, and its founder. Mr. Walsh, it's an honor. How can we help you today? Looking for something special. In a manner of speaking. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand my mother visited your establishment earlier today. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Victoria's mind raced, replaying the day's customers. Your mother, Margaret Walsh, 73, silver hair, beige coat. She wanted to buy a tie for my son. His gaze grew sharper. She mentioned receiving a rather unique welcome. Victoria's stomach clenched as realization dawned. The old woman in the dated clothes, the one they'd practically shown the door. Mr. Walsh, I've spent the past hour learning about Lumiere, James continued conversationally, though there was nothing casual in his tone. Fascinating operation owned by Delacroix Global. If I'm not mistaken, they've been trying to expand into the American market for some time. He moved toward a display of ties, the same one Margaret had been interested in. I'm also on the board of the Manhattan Retail Association. Delacroix has an application pending for the holiday showcase, I believe. Very competitive this year. Victoria felt beads of sweat forming at her hairline despite the boutique's careful climate control. Mr. Walsh, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Had we known your mother was... That's precisely the problem. James selected a blue silk tie, the same one Margaret had wanted to see. You shouldn't need to know who someone's son is to treat them with basic dignity. Outside, a gleaming black Escalade pulled up directly in front of the boutique, visible through the large windows. The chauffeur stepped out, opening the rear door. Several passers-by slowed, wondering which celebrity might emerge. Instead, Margaret Walsh stepped out, still in her simple beige coat. Victoria watched in horror as James walked to the door and held it open. "Donna, Mom," he called, "I found that tie you were looking for." Margaret hesitated on the sidewalk, seeing the boutique's gleaming interior through the open door. This wasn't what she'd wanted when she called James. She'd simply needed to hear his voice, to be reminded that she mattered to someone after that humiliating dismissal. "James, please," she said quietly. "This isn't necessary." Her son's expression softened as he stepped outside to join her. "Maybe not necessary for you. You're stronger than anyone I know." He took her hand gently. "But it's necessary for me and for them." For a moment, Margaret saw not the billionaire CEO, but the little boy she'd raised alone after John died. The child who'd come home with skinned knees and determined eyes, who'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through college, who'd built an empire from a dorm room idea. Stubborn, just like his father. "All right," she conceded. "But no theatrics," James grinned, the smile transforming his serious face. "When have I ever been theatrical?" Margaret raised an eyebrow, and he laughed. "Fair point. I'll behave." Together, they entered Lumiere. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Tense, electric. Victoria stood frozen near the register, while Alexis hovered uncertainly by a display. 2 other customers browsed silently, sensing the tension but unaware of its source. "Mrs. Walsh." Victoria stepped forward with a too bright smile. "We're so pleased to have you back. There was a misunderstanding earlier." "No misunderstanding," James interrupted smoothly. "You made a judgment based on appearances. An understandable mistake in your line of work, perhaps, but a mistake nonetheless." Margaret squeezed her son's hand in warning before addressing Victoria directly. "But I'd like to see that blue tie now, if it's not too much trouble." Victoria nearly tripped in her haste to retrieve the tie. "Of course, one of our finest pieces, handmade in Milan, pure silk." Her hands trembled slightly as she presented the tie on a velvet tray. Margaret examined it carefully, feeling the quality of the silk between her fingers. Despite everything, she was still focused on her original mission, finding the perfect gift for her grandson. "It's lovely," she decided. "Ethan will like this." She turned to James. "This is the one." James nodded, then addressed Victoria. "We'll take it, and perhaps you could show my mother your scarf collection as well. She has an excellent eye for quality." Victoria's relief was palpable. "Of course, Mr. Walsh. We have a beautiful new collection from Paris. Right this way, Mrs. Walsh." As Victoria led Margaret to another display, James stepped closer to the register where Alexis stood nervously. "I understand you were also present during my mother's earlier visit," he said quietly. Alexis swallowed. "Sir, I want to apologize." "I'm not interested in apologies offered under duress," James cut her off. "But I am interested in change. Real change." He handed her a business card. "My foundation offers retail training programs focusing on unconscious bias and inclusive customer service, free of charge to participating businesses." His voice remained low, ensuring Margaret couldn't overhear. "I could make things very difficult for this store, for your parent company, for your careers, but that wouldn't solve the real problem, would it?" Alexis stared at the card, then at James. "No, sir, it wouldn't. The program takes 6 weeks. I'll have my office follow up tomorrow." He glanced over at his mother, who was now examining a silk scarf with genuine interest. Her earlier humiliation temporarily forgotten. "She raised me to believe in second chances. This is yours." 3 weeks later, Margaret stepped off the elevator into the soaring lobby of Axiom Technologies. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of Manhattan, the December sky threatening snow. She nodded to the receptionist, who smiled warmly. Everyone at Axiom knew the founder's mother. "He's waiting for you, Mrs. Walsh," the young woman said, gesturing toward James's office. Margaret found her son standing at the window, phone pressed to his ear. He was in shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, the blue silk tie she'd purchased at Lumiere, which he'd immediately claimed for himself instead of giving it to Ethan as intended. "He will continue this later," he said into the phone, turning to embrace his mother. "Mom, right on time." "As always," she replied, setting her purse on a chair. "Ready for lunch?" "Almost. Just waiting on—" "Ah, here they are." The office door opened to reveal Diane, James's chief of staff, accompanied by Victoria and Alexis from Lumiere. Margaret stopped short, surprise evident on her face. The two boutique employees looked different, less polished, perhaps, but somehow more authentic. Victoria's expression was tentative as she extended her hand to Margaret. "Mrs. Walsh, thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Margaret shot her son a questioning look. "This was your idea?" "Actually, no," James replied, leaning against his desk. "Victoria called my office last week. This was her suggestion." Victoria nodded. "We've been participating in the Axiom Foundation's retail training program. It's been illuminating." She glanced at Alexis, who nodded encouragingly. "We wanted to thank you, Mrs. Walsh." "Thank me?" Margaret was genuinely puzzled. "For what?" "For giving us a second chance," Alexis said. "Types most people in your son's position would have made sure we were fired. Or worse," Victoria added. "The training has helped us recognize patterns we didn't even know we had. Assumptions we made about people based on superficial judgments." James watched his mother carefully, seeing the emotions play across her expressive face. Confusion, understanding, and finally, her characteristic compassion. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Margaret said simply. "No, I'm glad something positive came from our encounter." Victoria hesitated, then continued. "We've actually implemented new policies at Lumiere. Training for all staff, mystery shoppers of different ages and backgrounds, to test our service quality." She smiled slightly. "Our customer satisfaction scores have already improved." "And sales?" James asked. "Businessman to the core." "Up 12%, Victoria admitted. "Turns out, wealthy people come in all packages. We were limiting our own business by focusing so narrowly." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "John, my late husband, always said prejudice was bad business. People who judge books by covers miss all the best stories." A comfortable silence settled over the room, broken only when James clapped his hands once. "Well, I believe we have a lunch reservation. Would you two care to join us?" The invitation clearly surprised Victoria and Alexis as much as it did Margaret. "Oh, we couldn't impose," Victoria began. "Nonsense," Margaret interjected, with the quiet authority that had raised a billionaire. "I insist. I want to hear more about these changes you're making." As they gathered their things, James pulled his mother aside. "You're something else. You know that. After how they treated you." Margaret patted his cheek affectionately. "Holding grudges takes too much energy, James. I'm 73. I need to conserve what I have left." James laughed, shaking his head. "You'll outlive us all, Mom." As they waited for the elevator, Margaret watched the snow beginning to fall over Manhattan. "You know, I still need to find a gift for Ethan, since someone stole his tie." James grinned unrepentantly. "I hear there's a boutique on Fifth Avenue with excellent customer service. We could head there after lunch." "Perfect," Margaret replied, stepping into the elevator. "But this time, leave the Escalade at home. We're taking the subway like regular people." James groaned dramatically, but his eyes sparkled with affection. "Yes, ma'am." Spring in New York brought cherry blossoms to Central Park and a fresh energy to the city. Margaret Walsh sat on a bench near the pond, enjoying the warmth of the April sun on her face. Beside her, Ethan fidgeted with the tablet in his hands, occasionally glancing up at passing joggers and tourists. "Grandma, is Mom coming?" the 10-year-old asked, pushing his glasses up on his nose. "She'll be here," Margaret assured him. "Your father's bringing her from the airport." Their flight from London must have been delayed. As if on cue, a familiar voice called out, "Mom, Ethan!" James approached along the path, accompanied by his ex-wife Natalie. Despite their divorce 3 years prior, they had maintained an amicable relationship, co-parenting Ethan with a maturity that Margaret had always admired. "Sorry, we're late," Natalie said, bending to hug Margaret before turning to embrace her son. "How's my genius doing?" Ethan launched into an excited description of his science project, while James settled beside his mother on the bench. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Ready for this?" Margaret smoothed her skirt, a new one, in a soft lavender that complemented her eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be. Still think it's unnecessary." "Humor me," James replied with a smile. After a leisurely walk through the park, the family made their way to Fifth Avenue. The Lumiere boutique looked much as it had 6 months earlier, though with one noticeable difference. A discreet sign in the window announced, "All are welcome. We mean it." Inside, the atmosphere was subtly transformed. While still elegant and high-end, there was a warmth that hadn't existed before. A young salesman greeted an elderly couple, while another staff member assisted a teenager looking at wallets. Victoria emerged from the back, her face lighting up when she spotted Margaret. "Mrs. Walsh, we've been expecting you." She beckoned them forward. "Everything is ready." Puzzled, Margaret allowed herself to be led to the center of the boutique, where a small podium had been set up. A dozen or so people were gathered, staff members, a few customers, and several faces she didn't recognize. Victoria stepped up to the podium and gently tapped a glass. "C'est tous. If I could have everyone's attention, please." The small crowd quieted as Victoria continued. 6 months ago, this boutique made a terrible mistake. We judged someone based solely on appearance and failed to provide the respectful service everyone deserves. She looked directly at Margaret. That mistake became our greatest opportunity for growth. She gestured to a tall woman in a crisp suit. With the help of the Axiom Foundation's retail training program, Lumiere has become a model for inclusive luxury retail. Today, Delacroix Global is proud to announce that this program will be implemented across all our 217 locations worldwide. Applause rippled through the gathering. Margaret felt James's hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Victoria continued, "We'd like to thank the person who made this possible, not through anger or retribution, but through grace and second chances. Mrs. Margaret Walsh, would you please join me?" Feeling self-conscious but proud, Margaret stepped forward. Victoria presented her with a small crystal plaque. The Margaret Walsh Initiative for Inclusive Customer Service. "We've established a scholarship fund," Victoria explained, "to help disadvantaged youth pursue careers in retail management, and every trainee will hear your story." Margaret accepted the plaque with trembling hands. She hadn't prepared a speech, had no idea James and Victoria had planned this. But looking at the faces around her, her son, her grandson, her former daughter-in-law, and these people who had learned and grown from a simple human error, she found the words, "My late husband used to say that how we treat people when no one's watching reveals our true character. But I think how we respond after we've made a mistake reveals even more." She smiled at Victoria and the Lumiere staff. "Thank you for turning a hurtful moment into something meaningful." Later, as they left the boutique, Ethan clutching a bag containing his belated birthday gift, a wallet he'd selected himself, James walked arm in arm with his mother. "Not bad for a simple, elderly woman, huh?" he teased gently. Margaret elbowed him in the ribs. "Watch it, young man. This simple elderly woman can still ground you." James laughed, and for a moment, Margaret saw the little boy he'd once been, and the good man he'd become. As they walked toward the waiting car, she reflected that sometimes life's most humiliating moments could lead to unexpected grace. Behind them, the boutique's door opened for a shabbily dressed old man who entered hesitantly. Through the window, Margaret watched as Victoria personally stepped forward to welcome him with a genuine smile. Small changes, she thought, but they mattered. "Subway back to Queens?" James asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course," Margaret replied firmly. "I'm still me." And that, she knew, was more than enough.